I have the privilege of introducing our luncheon keynote speaker today. I'm proud to call him a friend of over 15 years and college roommate for 2 of those years. I'm very excited that Tyler is able to share with us what has become a major piece of his life over the past 5 years. Tyler Way is the co-founder and creative director for Has Heart, a Michigan-based nonprofit that partners with military veterans, with graphic designers, with the mission to share their story through art, design, and fashion. Tyler and his wife Kendra quit their careers in the fashion industry to take Has Heart across the country on the 50 States Veterans Plus Artists United working tour, partnering a veteran from each state with an artistic designer to design and create a custom artistic product. Prior to hitting the road in July 2017, he was a footwear designer for Wolverine Worldwide. Tyler designed Sebago boat shoes for 3+ years. He has also created pointillism-style artwork for various NBA athletes, including LeBron James, Chris Paul, Rip Hamilton, and others. Interestingly, one of Tyler's first graphic shoe designs was our sophomore year of college at Grand Valley State University in Michigan. My request was an American flag-themed shoe. That pair has since disappeared, but I like to think I provided some initial design inspiration for this amazing intersection of art, design, fashion that now supports the stories of veterans across the United States. Tyler, take it away.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for having me. Quick show of hands, just so I know, how many, or forks, or knives, whatever you have in your hand, how many of you are veterans out in the crowd? Wow. I've never been in a room where so many people can kick my ass. Out of that many, how many are from the Army? I figured that'd be the response I'd get. What about the Navy? Marines? Air Force? Are there any Coasties? One Coastie. That's funny. Well, I am not a veteran, but I thank all of you for your service. As Charlie said, I'd be classified as an artist and designer, which probably makes you wonder, then why would I be here at this conference talking to a room full of veterans? Long story short, as Charlie mentioned, in college I had this weird idea to custom design sneakers. It was my freshman year in my dorm room, and trying to distract myself from studying one day, I picked up an old pair of shoes that were laying next to me and a Sharpie marker and doodled a little design. What Charlie probably doesn't know is he was the first person that actually saw those shoes and thought they were cool, so I probably blame Charlie for even getting me on this path. Over kind of a course of that freshman year, I developed a way to custom paint on sneakers using special leather acrylic paint. And so the shoe here actually started off as an all-white shoe, and through a hand-painted process, I'd be able to add the layers and the colors and the designs. So that kind of got me interested in shoes, and I wanted to mirror that passion with basketball. I grew up playing high school basketball. I'm like 5'9", 5'10" white guy, so college and NBA wasn't quite in my career path, but I still wanted to be involved in that world a little bit. So I got a summer internship with the Detroit Pistons. I'm from Michigan, grew up on the east side. The college we went to was on the west side, so after that summer, I would go back to the Palace of Auburn Hills, which is a 2 or 3 hour drive after class, and I had a little employee ID pass that I got from my internship that I'm not sure if I was supposed to hand in when I was done, but I kept it just in case. And so when I went back to these games, I just kind of pretended like I was supposed to be there. I had like a fake clipboard and some notes, and so I kind of snuck my way back into the NBA tunnels and waited for some of the players to come out of the locker room. And somehow I mustered up the courage to walk up to these 7-foot, basically freaks of nature, people that were extremely nice, and shook their hand and said, will you let me design shoes for you? And I think at first they just kind of smiled and nodded and, said, yeah, sure, kid, and kind of went on with their night. But then I went back the second game and third game and fourth game, and eventually, I think just to get rid of me, Tayshaun Prince finally brought in a pair of shoes for me to design for him. And once I brought those back to the next game, Rip Hamilton saw them, and he brought in 3 pairs, and then he brought in 3 more pairs, and so it just kind of started to evolve. I didn't go to college to paint shoes, despite what my parents think. My degrees were actually advertising and public relations, and a minor in entrepreneurship, and so this was kind of my side hustle and education outside of the classroom. But it eventually kind of enabled me to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And that was to tell stories through art and design. When you walk up to million-dollar athletes that get paid to wear free shoes, I don't know how or why they would pay me to do so, but I figured this would be an opportunity to make them special. They worked their entire lives to reach this pinnacle of a sport, and so I wanted each pair of shoes to really tell their story and be something that they'd be proud of and display in their trophy cases at home. And so if there's any Cleveland Cavalier fans, this was a pair I did for LeBron James for his first MVP award. Sorry for your loss. I get it, as a Detroit Pistons fan, it's hard when you have to rebuild. So from doing more and more shoes, I eventually started to develop my own artistic style. It's, I guess, commonly referred to as pointillism, in which on the eyes, which are Chris Paul's eyes, these are for his charity auction. It kind of is a lot of little dots that come together to form a bigger picture. Amazingly, these shoes sold for over $3,000 for his foundation, but ultimately these are special to me because they helped me develop my style that I wanted to expand into larger canvas artwork. And so I started doing large. This one was an 8-foot wide by 5-foot tall 3-panel canvas art piece for Phil Knight, who's also a veteran, but he's also the founder of Nike. And so being able to figure out how to tell his story through art was kind of my next challenge. And so this, for some of you who may not be familiar with the story of Nike, he started it in his, also after college at University of Oregon. He was a track athlete, and so the Oregon Ducks is very significant to him and his story, but he co-founded it with his track coach, Bill Bowerman. And so I wanted to make this piece special to him, so embedded within all these thousands and thousands of little dots is kind of this story of Nike. And it starts with the blue ribbon that's around the Duck's neck. Before it was Nike, it was called Blue Ribbon Sports. And then that changed to Nike eventually. And Phil's wife's name is Penny, and so around the neck is a little penny that represents her. And he's holding the first waffle shoe that kind of jump-started the whole Nike company. And then he's laying on a box of all the different Nike shoes throughout the years since the 1970s. And so I really started to develop, I guess, the desire to tell stories in a unique way. So much so that, for some stupid reason, Phil asked me if I would paint the wedding portrait for LeBron and Savannah James. Phil wasn't able to go to the wedding and felt bad, and so he wanted to get him a nice wedding gift. And so he actually got me their private wedding portrait, and over a course of 8 to 10 months, In my little apartment in Grand Rapids, Michigan, I kind of started doing lots and lots of dots and kind of creating this portrait of him and his wife, which thankfully turned out all right. It's extremely nerve-wracking to have to paint a bride on her wedding day, especially using little dots. And so thankfully it turned out all right, and I was able to present it with Phil to LeBron at the Nike headquarters. And it's hanging up now in one of their bedrooms. And the way I presented it to him is that each dot represents all the little actions that make up a good marriage and partnership. And so I told him every time he and Savannah walk by it to kind of be reminded that it's the little things that count in life. And so I wanted to make that special for him. But then I had this opportunity to actually design shoes. Instead of painting on them, I was able to design them from start to finish. I worked for an international company, as Charlie mentioned. It's actually pronounced Sebago, but it's like tomato, tomato, Sebago, Sebago. And so I worked with them for over 5 years in total. But that taught me the ability to design product and what that meant. And so with that meant traveling to factories and learning the manufacturing process, learning supplying process, and a lot of travel, which would eventually kind of have a role in what I would do with Has Heart. It also made me present into a room full of people like this. Although many of them were international and English wasn't their first language, so they often didn't laugh at many of my jokes. But I did kind of at least learn how to deal with it. But then I got an email and kind of a request to get a cup of coffee. And that was kind of where my story changed, because it was with Michael Hyacinth, who's an 8-year Navy veteran. And through this discussion, we realized the disconnect between our two worlds. We both were living in Grand Rapids, Michigan. He's originally from the Bronx, still has the accent. And we just kind of realized our worlds didn't intersect naturally. And so as a designer and him as a veteran, we wanted to create the ability for our worlds to come together. Stereotypically, those worlds don't mesh, but we kind of realized and noticed the potential, especially with a lot of younger veterans coming back. Personally, I had some childhood friends who were serving in Iraq and Afghanistan, and so this was kind of my ability to serve them in a way. And for Michael, it was even more impactful because not only was he an 8-year Navy veteran, but he had a twin brother who was also still serving. But then his wife's family lost one of their cousins, who was killed in action, Corporal Dane DeBoer, who was a Marine. And when his family was grieving and going through this process, the city of Grand Rapids was preparing for a large art competition, which would transform the city of Grand Rapids and bring hundreds of thousands of people into the city around art. And so Michael kind of had this idea of bringing people together through art, but kind of changing what the narrative was. And so we kind of had this idea to start an organization, which eventually became Has Heart, to kind of bridge that gap between the civilian and military world and utilizing the creative world to do so. As Charlie mentioned, through the mediums of art, design, and fashion. And so we didn't quite know what this would look like, but then Michael met a local Marine who was paralyzed from the neck down from injuries he suffered in Iraq. Michael found out through his full-time nurse that he loved collecting t-shirts. And so Michael asked him if he wanted to design one himself. And immediately his face lit up with a huge grin. And Michael knew. He called me up and asked if I'd be willing to work with this veteran to create a t-shirt design. And since his vocal cords were also damaged, all he could do was nod his head yes and no to communicate. And so he had a full-time nurse that had a clipboard that had the alphabet and this alphanumeric communication code. And so for him to spell out hi, for instance, she'd have to guess 1, and then he'd nod his head yes, and then she'd guess A, and you can go no, B, no, C, D, E, F, G, H. Finally nod his head yes, so that's the first letter he was trying to spell out. And then she'd have to go back through and 1, A, no, B, no, all the way to I. So it was very tedious for him to communicate any type of message or feeling with his friends and family. And he was a 28-year-old Marine that loved driving fast cars and lived a life that he wasn't able to live anymore. And so after an hour of asking him a lot of yes and no questions for me to get to know his personal style, his interests, his influences, his favorite music, his favorite movies, just to kind of understand what the design would look like, my final question to him was what is his definition of a hero? And after about 5 minutes of trying to spell it out, he spelled out total sacrifice. And so for everyone in the room, we got chills and goosebumps and tears because we all looked at him as a hero, but yet he deflected that and said those that gave their ultimate sacrifice were the true heroes. And so that was, it still chokes me up a little bit, but that was such a powerful process where, okay, we realized once we put this on a shirt, then it gives people the ability to hear his message, see his message, and also wear his message. And so very quickly, we realized the power of sharing veteran stories through art, design, and fashion. This design was so powerful as an artist to be able to give a veteran a voice like this, and then for him to finally be able to, I guess, unleash a lot of that that he's been holding in was so powerful that we decided to create the Hero series, which pairs a veteran with a graphic designer. Some of you might even recognize that veteran, Israel Del Toro. He's gone on to win countless medals at Warrior Games and continues to amaze people. And we worked with him in 2012 with an artist named Chuck Anderson. And so after working with the first Marine, we decided, okay, let's partner 5 veterans with 5 designers. And the 5 veterans represented each of the 5 branches, although it was hard to find a coastie sometimes, although we tried our best. But we would bring them all to Grand Rapids for a few days and just basically partner them through and walk them through a powerful design process. For a lot of veterans, they came in thinking they weren't creative, thinking they didn't even have a story. But after we kind of walked through this process, and we just have a list of simple questions that the artist can ask the veteran to spur conversation, in which, as they kind of open up and share a little bit more about their experiences, the designer is able to kind of transform some of that into a web of different mantras and slogans and words that represent their service and their life that then get translated. So it's kind of through this powerful process that we wanted to be sure to document it as much as we can, because that's really where the power of their story comes alive, is when they kind of get through those breakthroughs. And so we document it with video and photos and articles, and then we unveil it each fall. And so, as I mentioned earlier, when Michael's family was grieving the loss of Corporal DeBoer, Art Prize was happening, and that brings about 500,000 people into Grand Rapids, Michigan for 3 weeks, and it's basically an open art festival where there's restaurants turned into art galleries, and there's art all over the streets. And so we realized this was the perfect launching point to feature each of these veteran stories. And so we would exhibit and frame their designs as a work of art, and then we have the story next to it, and t-shirts and products that people could purchase. And we found this to be a powerful way to enable people to walk in a veteran's shoes. in a way that they wouldn't normally get through a 60-second news clip or an online article. And so we would do this along with a pop-up shop that featured all the veterans' designs onto stories that would essentially not only help share their story through hang tags and verbiage and enable them to walk out with veteran stories, so then when they get asked, what does your shirt mean, they have the ability to share that veteran story on their behalf. And I mentioned kind of production earlier when I was a shoe designer, and we wanted to be sure to print locally as best as we could and impact local businesses. We wanted everything to be made in the US. It's definitely not always easy to do, but that's kind of been a mission of ours. And so this example is a pair of boots that we worked with 5 of our veterans to co-design with Bates Footwear. And so not only did we want to tell veteran stories, which the 5 stars on the back represent the 5 branches, and the camo is from the Special Black Ops uniforms, and the feet hooks represent wounded veterans that are living with their injuries. So not only did we want to tell that story, but we also wanted to highlight all of the businesses and hands that went into the shoe. And so this is printed on the front of the shoebox, and it calls out where was the leather tanned, and where did the leather welt come from, and where did the thread come from. And it came from all these different US businesses. And so we wanted to enable people to slow down and appreciate the final product a little bit more and understand the meaning behind it. This is what the boot looked like. And the red welt stitch represents the sacrifice. And so every time you put on your pair of boots, you see that, and it's just kind of a daily reminder of those who gave the ultimate sacrifice. I'm wearing the boots. They don't look that good anymore. This is 5 years after wear. Kind of beat them to shit, but they're very comfortable. Not only shoes and shirts and patches and stickers, but we also wanted to have these daily reminders available to people on a coffee mug and even on greeting cards. Sometimes it's hard to express your gratitude or your feelings to veterans and families and loved ones, and so we worked with a greeting card company to create a line of cards that can kind of help say thank you. And so we managed to do this for 5 years. Each year, we would basically put the proceeds from the year before to do the next year project. And we were essentially self-funded all of these years, but we knew the impact that we were making. And some of that was obviously giving veterans a creative outlet, letting them tell their story, even those that thought they didn't have a story. We knew they did, and so we not only gave them an outlet, but we figured out a way to engage the creative community. A lot of times it's hard to figure out how you can give back. And so for artists and designers, we gave them that direct ability to work directly with a veteran to help them tell their story. And then their final product and their design then engages the civilian population. So they get to interact with the veteran's design and see it in a tangible form that they can then walk away with. And that enables them to tell that veteran story for them, and continue to build awareness of veterans' experiences and their stories, and not only what they did for our country, but what they can still do. These proceeds were important. We would give 25% back to that veteran, but then it would also go to the next year's project to work with another veteran. And as I said, when we wanted to print and manufacture these designs, we tried to work with local businesses and really have the impact stay within each of the communities. And we found that it built the community. We've heard countless stories of people coming into our exhibits, either walking in with their mom or dad or their spouse or even their friend, who previously never really shared much about their service, but as soon as they stepped in to our exhibit and saw the designs, they started to open up and share pieces of their story and how that related to the designs that they were seeing in front of them. And so we really saw people starting to talk, and I think it just kind of takes one person to open up and share and kind of have that ripple effect that encourages other veterans to share their story as well. And so after 5 or 6 years of doing this, we asked ourselves, how do we impact more veterans, more creatives, and more civilians? This was a nights and weekends passion project, essentially, for Michael and myself and a few other volunteers over the years. So we all had day jobs. Michael has 4 young kids. I was still a footwear designer, and so the busier and busier we got, we feared that it would be harder and harder to do Has Heart, especially since we were self-funded and just didn't have the resources to hire people. And so I kind of talked with my soon-to-be wife, Kendra. We were dating, engaged, and married, and kind of this process, and asked her how she felt of taking the Has Heart and the Hero Series project across the country ourselves. I kind of sensed in order for Has Heart to grow and expand and impact more people, we would have to dedicate ourselves to it more. And that started with me, and thankfully my wife saw that vision, and she saw the impact and was willing to take that leap of faith with me. So we decided to somehow figure out a way where we could quit our jobs. I was a footwear designer and she was a fashion buyer for a retail store, and take Has Heart across the country. And so that's where this 50 States Veterans and Artists United project kind of came to be. We didn't know exactly how we'd be able to do that, but we worked with the Schultz Family Foundation, pitched them this whole plan of doing a 50-state tour, and they said, that's great, start with one state and do a pilot project. So even though we wanted to hit the road right away, they were kind of right in doing so. And so we started in Seattle, Washington, and we paired Victor Melendez, who's a Starbucks designer, with Monique Brown, who's a U.S. Army veteran. For 2 days, we worked with them, and through that sheet of questions that Victor was able to ask Monique, Victor started piecing her story together. And so you can see some of the words on the whiteboard that kind of came from those questions. A lot of them being about never leaving a comrade behind, the warrior ethos, family, harmony, music, values, respect, integrity, and selflessness. And so as this was kind of happening, this is my wife, Kendra. She is taking notes and writing basically what would become Monique's story, while Victor is basically beginning to translate her words and her message into different designs. And so this is kind of part of us documenting that process, so when we share this in an exhibit or online, people can kind of see how that design started. And so it starts with a few of these key words that Victor picked up on: spirituality, military, family, and then it goes into her personal I guess, creed, in which she saw the homeless population, especially among veterans in Seattle, out of control. So she started her own nonprofit called FOB Hope, and she started basically going around and gathering resources that she'd be able to pass out to homeless veterans. And so through kind of this process and working with homeless veterans, she began to heal herself. And so kind of as Victor's sketches developed with this helping hand and this heart and sharing hope, it kind of just continued to evolve, and understanding that she was healing the more she helped other veterans. And so as each design iteration kind of developed, we began to see Monique's design come to life a little bit more and more each time. And so after going through all of these sketches, and there was one that specifically stood out to her, and as you can see in the photo, she literally just circled around it and pointed at it and said, that's it, that's the one that speaks to me. And so their design was called Guiding Ethos, and it represents the love and compassion and the spirit to help other veterans, and in that way also heal yourself. And so we produced this into a patch and a t-shirt and kind of demonstrated the process and the impact, and created a toolkit for the rest of the tour. But there were a few problems standing in our way. One of them was, how the hell are we going to get from state to state? We have no funding. We're not sure how this is going to happen. So, let's look at an RV. And we were discussing options with Winnebago, who's the largest RV manufacturer. And after a few months, figured out they don't really have marketing budgets. They can't give us an RV. They can't loan us. You can't rent an RV, at least not for what we could afford. And so they said we could buy one at cost. And so that was kind of discouraging to us. So Kendra and I realized, okay, we're married. This is basically going to be our first home. So Has Heart definitely can't afford it. So let's invest in something where we think we'd be able to live and work out of. And I don't know if anyone's familiar with Airstream, but they just have this unique, riveted history that kind of fits nicely with Has Heart and kind of that military aesthetic. And so we ended up personally financing an Airstream before I quit my job because I needed my paycheck in order to get approved. And then after we drove off the lot, then I quit my job the next week. I gave them a heads up. I didn't just peace out. They knew. So we had an Airstream, and luckily we were able to then work with a local Chevy dealer who donated down payment and a 2-year lease for us to pull it with. And so we kind of had our setup, and Kendra worked out our most efficient route to cover all 50 states, trying to get south before the winter hit, which we did not successfully do because it snowed in New Orleans, but we did our best. And we had a few key sponsors that enabled us to get started. One of them was Alpha Industries, who is our apparel partner, and they help us produce each design into a shirt and a patch. And then the biggest partner is AIGA, which is a national organization for graphic artists. And so they have 74 chapters across the country. And so actually years before we even started this plan, we kind of noticed this national infrastructure of artists and designers that are eager to give back to their communities. And we knew veterans were scattered across the country, so we wanted to be that middleman in each state that we went to that would connect the two. And so we received a little bit of grant funding from the Schultz Family Foundation, and then kind of laid out the list of cities based on where some of these chapters were. We quickly learned, it was Kendra and myself, and then Michael was stationed back in Grand Rapids, that in order to accomplish this, we needed a lot of helping hands. And so, this quote is kind of tells it all. And collaboration is the art of achieving what couldn't be accomplished alone. My grandpa used to always say, many hands make light work, and that always stuck with me. And we've kind of witnessed that throughout the tour. And so each project involves a veteran. We either get referred to a veteran from an organization that we have previously worked with. Michael has a military network that he can reach out to. And if we don't have either of those in some states, then we just Google search veterans organizations in South Dakota and kind of go through and cold call and cold email and ask if they have any recommendations or referrals to veterans. And so that's typically how we find our veteran. The best way is actually for other veterans to refer other veterans that have gone through the project. That's always been the easiest opportunity, but obviously it's not always as easy as it seems. And then we work with AIGA to help us find a graphic designer, a videographer, a photographer, and a workspace that we can work in for 2 days. And then in an ideal world, each state project would have a sponsor that would cover the costs. We want to be able to pay the veteran a little bit and pay the designer a little bit and the videographer, because we understand for the creatives involved, this is their profession, and so we want to kind of respect their time. And obviously, for each veteran, this is a big ask on their part to become vulnerable a little bit and to open up and share their story and have that documented. And so we found it wasn't quite that easy to get a sponsor in every state because we're only in a state for 7 to 10 days. Typically go to states where we don't know anyone. So that's kind of been an ongoing issue that we've worked on. But we at least had enough to get started, and so that's exactly what we did. We started in Burlington, Vermont, and we went to Portland, Maine, Port Smith, New Hampshire, Boston, Providence, Rhode Island, Philadelphia, Bethany, Connecticut, New York, which was really special. We actually did this one at the National 9/11 Memorial and Museum. And he is a World War II veteran. And the way we got connected with him is because the designer there in the Yankees hat, who, if anyone is a graphic designer, probably recognizes who he is. But this is his great uncle. And so for years, he knew his great uncle served in World War II, but never really was able to ask him any questions about it. It just wasn't the right time whenever they're at family gatherings, and so he was pretty eager and excited to be able to sit down with him for 2 days and really ask his question and ask what his story was. And what you don't see on the other end of the table is all his aunts and uncles, and so basically it became like a big family affair, which was really cool. This is New York, New Jersey, Annapolis, Maryland, not too far away from here, with Paula Nero. Chantilly, Virginia, Delaware, Charlotte, North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, Louisiana. This one was really unique because the designer was also a veteran and the videographer was also a veteran. So this was our first all-veteran crew. So that was a really awesome project to be a part of. And then we went to Texas, New Mexico, Arizona. This was our first husband and wife team. And so he was an Army veteran and she was a designer. And so this was the first time, really, even she's been able to sit down with her husband and ask these questions. And so for her, it was the first time she heard a lot of these stories and experiences. We did 3 projects in California. We did San Diego, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. Then we went to Nevada, Oregon. This was the Washington project. Boise, Idaho. We were corrected many times. It's not Boise, it's Boise. Jackson, Wyoming. Montana. Alaska even. We weren't able to take the Airstream up to Alaska, so we flew from Seattle and actually stayed with the couple that we worked with. She was an Army veteran and he was a Coastie. So we did work with a few Coasties. Utah, actually our designer wasn't able to show up the morning of. He had car trouble, so I had to work with her as the designer, which was kind of a special treat for me. Colorado, which was another husband and wife team. That's a dog, it's not like a fur coat or anything. It's alive too, it's just... Then we did Lincoln, Nebraska, Des Moines, Iowa, Kansas City, Missouri, Wichita, Kansas. He was a chaplain, which was our first chaplain, which provided a unique perspective on deployments and serving. And then Oklahoma, you guys might recognize him. He spoke here a few years ago. Colonel Gadsden, incredibly nice, humble, loving guy. That was a fun project to be a part of. He actually lives in the D.C. area, and but he lived and worked in Oklahoma, so he was our Oklahoma veteran. But we told him we weren't able to afford to actually fly him out because we thought he lived in Oklahoma still. So he actually paid his own way to Oklahoma because he wanted to be a part of the project so much. And I think out of most veterans we've worked with, it was really powerful to see what he got out of the experience. So I won't spoil anything, but his design will be really special once it comes out. And then we did Bentonville, Arkansas, Mississippi, Hawaii. We cannot forget Hawaii. We also couldn't bring the Airstream there, but luckily we could float it, but it'd take us a while. We worked with a Korean War veteran that what was incredibly unique was he witnessed the Pearl Harbor attacks. He was an 11-year-old boy, and his family had a farm on the bay, and he was out feeding the pigs early in the morning, and Japanese bombers and planes were flying right above him. And he said he could actually see the pilot's eyes, he could actually see like, the pilots. And so He basically sat there on the railroad tracks and watched Pearl Harbor happen. And he wasn't old enough at the time to enlist, but as soon as he was, he did, and he ended up serving over 25 years. And then in Jacksonville, Alabama, this cowboy is a Green Beret, also kind of a badass guy to work with. And then in Georgia. And so not only were we working with a veteran and designer, we also had kind of a small team of videographers and photographers behind the scenes being a part of it. And so in reality, we worked with, I think, close to 130 individuals across these states. So this is kind of a small example of some of those designs. Each one is embedded with a lot of detail, and similar to kind of the paintings and shoes that I showed you, a lot of the story is kind of hidden within the message. And so our goal is to have the design get people's attention and hold it enough where they look a little bit deeper into each design and try and understand and decode some of the meaning. So this is kind of another pair. And again, to give you an example, the one in the bottom right, the title of it is Don't Give Up. And she was a veteran that tried to commit suicide, but instead she called the Veterans Crisis Hotline. And through that phone call, she got connected to Veterans Service Dog Service. And through a service dog, basically, she saved her own life because she had something to train and live for. And so she was also a linguist, and so it's actually Morse code that's kind of embedded into that fragmented stained glass motif, and that spells don't give up. And so there's a lot of subtle meanings that as you peel back the layers, you begin to understand each veteran's story on a different level. So each of these designs, as I said, get made into a t-shirt and a patch with a little Velcro so people can adhere them to each of their backpacks or jackets or uniforms. And then along with each of the shirts and designs, it comes with a little postcard-sized description of that veteran's story. And so this is how, if someone either walks out of our exhibit with, they can carry the story with them. So when they get asked, they can kind of share that veteran's story. And then also includes a link to a website in which they can go and dig a little bit deeper into that veteran's story. And so each of the projects has a video where people can kind of see behind the process a little bit more. This one in Rhode Island actually is 11 minutes long, and it's basically a mini documentary. The video crew that we worked with actually entered it into a video film festival and actually won some awards with it. And so they're just really beautiful pieces of art that these videographers and photographers and designers are putting together to showcase these veteran stories. We also capture the process in photos, so people can be basically a fly on the wall and look back to see step by step how these stories kind of came to be. And then we try and be as transparent as possible and showcase, okay, if the shirt is $30, where is that money going towards? And so 16 of it is manufacturing costs in the US, and then the veteran gets 25% of proceeds, and then the rest goes back to the organization to partner other veterans with other designers. And of course, we share this through our social media channels. If anyone has their phone with them right now or want to jot down any of our websites, I'll give you kind of a second to do that. Our website is hasheart.us. And then that's the same as a lot of our Instagram and Twitter handles. So we were doing all this, and then it all came to kind of a screeching halt. Somehow we were able to stretch the initial funding that we raised and made it to 39 states. We were able to work with over 50 veterans and over 123 designers. And we basically found out that it was just the two of us, Kendra and I, on the road, and it was so much time and work to plan and execute and follow up on and go to the next state, that we weren't able to fundraise as easily as we were hoping we'd be able to while on the road. So we still have 11 states left to go, basically Tennessee on up, and then the Dakotas. And so our mission isn't quite complete. We're still working on raising the funds to finish. It's been a tough 8 months because we've basically been back in Michigan living with my in-laws in their basement, which as a 33-year-old is never a fun thing to do. But when you, as many of you know, have a heart to serve and see the impact that happens, money isn't the reason why you're doing it. And so this is kind of the situation that we're in now. And our goal to finish the tour is so we can compile everything into a coffee table book and take that back around the country through traveling art museum exhibits and do a documentary film and do different talks like this where we can share veteran stories with audiences who may not otherwise hear them or come across them. And so ultimately, the goal of this 50 states is to build a foundation that Has Heart can grow on. And so as we go to each location, we're building these mini groups of veterans and creatives and partners that can one day potentially become chapters. And we want to become a platform that these veteran stories can live on, and so people can go and visit Has Heart and experience these veteran stories in one location. And so ultimately, we learned very quickly that if you want to go fast, you go alone. We started fast. We had a few sponsors, but if you want to go far, to go together. And so part of my talk here to finish up is to ask you guys and put this out in the room. We need everyone's help, and I think that starts with social media. And so thank you for taking the photos and following us, because as we approach sponsors and partners, that's usually the first number that they look to. And also if there's any opportunities or organizations that you think would be a good fit, I think there's a lot of opportunity with what you guys are doing in transitioning veterans into the civilian lifestyle. Because sometimes before you know where you're going, it helps to understand where you've been. And so our process enables a lot of veterans to take a couple days and really reflect on their life. So if anyone is interested, here is my larger-than-life business card. I also have some smaller ones up here with me. So if we have some time before you move to your next breakout session, I'd be happy to share that with you. And I'll kind of end with this call to action and encourage you guys to share your stories. Your loved ones want to hear about them, even if it may seem like they don't care or they're not interested, especially if you have teenagers. They do care and they will be interested. And so I encourage you guys each to share your story. This was one patch where we actually could not find a veteran to work with. It was in Delaware. It's a small state. Not many people live there. I understand that. But we worked with two artists who both had fathers that served in World War II. One of them apparently was a part of the Battle of the Bulge, and the other one worked as an artist rendering for the atomic bomb. But they didn't know any of this their entire life. They didn't find out until after their dads passed away. And so their plea was to let go of your stories and share those stories. Even though they may not be war stories necessarily, since only 10% of veterans see combat. But they're still service stories and stories that people can learn. And for the few civilians, including myself, this is always a reminder to make time to listen. Buy a veteran a cup of coffee, and ask questions and learn some of their stories. And so if it helps, I have a few notebooks here. Write down your story, your experiences, the men and women you served with and want to remember. Even if you don't share this with anyone, it helps to get it out and to write it down. So I have a few notebooks that I brought with me. So if anyone wants one, come up and I'll be happy to give you one. And we also have plenty for sale on our website. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your time. And thank you for what you're doing. Thank you.